I'm a punster. I just can't help it. When I considered about a year ago giving this talk on Charles Hartshorne, the eminent 20th century theologian, I knew I'd have to clarify his words so you can process his process philosophy. His is a natural theology. It doesn't resort to smoke and mirrors or mystery. Hartshorne tried to answer this question: can God be conceived of in a way that is not logically absurd, without paradox or contradiction? I think he does answer that question affirmatively. Hey, Charles Hartshorne is a natural for us UUs. I have a unique perspective. When a student at Claremont Graduate School of Religion in 1974, I was a research assistant with the Center for Process Studies. It was a think tank centering on the thought of Charles Hartshorne. I was a copy editor of its journal, and I was also the archivist who received and categorized and cataloged his personal library. Well, today I'm going to tell you about Hartshorne's life, the story of it, interspersed with bits of metaphysics. It will be a world tour in about 20 minutes, so hold on to your space-time continuum. Charles Hartshorne was born in the small town of Katanning, Pennsylvania in 1897, the tail end of the Gilded Age. His father was an unusual Episcopalian minister whose parents had been Quakers and Universalists. Charles wrote, and I'm trying to sound like him, Father believed in human freedom in the creative sense. Creatures are just lesser creators. To have a world, to even have a world, is for God to run the risks of fallible decision makers determining the details of that world. Well, Charles was later to elaborate on this in his mature philosophy of the nature of God. The main idea of his surrelativism, or panentheism, is that the relative, or changeable, contains within itself and even exceeds in value the absolute, or immutable. God is not an either-or phenomenon, but rather a both-and one. God is a different logical type than other kinds of entities who relate to creatures and can also be known philosophically. Well, talk about relating to creatures. Charles' mother must have been, well, a saint, because she and Charles's dad had 6 kids. She had a soft spot for women's emancipation, and Charles later became a feminist when he grew up. Charles said he had a sheltered childhood when he was young, but however, he hit his head when he fell out of a painter's cart, and he fell out of a second-story window onto his head, and he set fire to his sister's dress and threw it out the window. He was no angel, but look how great he turned out. So don't you go worrying about Reverend Corey and Alexis and their large family, because good things come in big packages. One of the big events in Charles's early life was coming across an article in Popular Electricity, which was the precursor to popular mechanics. And in that article, there was some instruction that prompted him to try to make a tiny motor by putting wires into a light socket. This blew a fuse, but surprisingly, it wasn't his father's fuse. His father calmly explained how it all worked. Charles thought of himself as an inventor from this early age, and invent he did. His rediscovery, now bear with me here, okay? His rediscovery of St. Anselm's ontological argument and his reworking of that into his dipolar theism was ingenious invention. One wonders if you got that term, though, from playing with batteries. You've heard of dipoles, yes? Whoa. Let's just unpack those big words. Ontological comes from ontology, which is the study of the nature of being itself. Saint Anselm was the Archbishop of Canterbury way back in the 11th century. His ontological proof of God's existence went something like this. In very popularized terms, you understand. It went something like this. I know I am imperfect. Therefore, there must be something perfect in order for me to know what imperfection is. God is the perfect being because none greater can be imagined. This point of view stuck with Western thinkers for centuries. Anselm's mistake, said Hartshorne, was in equating perfect with infinite. Hartshorne used logic to show that the supreme being is necessarily both absolute and relative in a way that includes all created things. Humans and creatures may change part of the time, but God changes all the time. To be supremely perfect, then, means to be the most relative. This is Hartshorne's dipolar theism. I am attracted to panentheism for many reasons. It means I'm encouraged to change my thoughts on who God is. Because, well, God changes all the time. Why shouldn't I change my thoughts about God? As the most perfectly inclusive being, God enfolds all races, genders, classes, abilities, all those categories that add to the richness of the world, and hence to divinity. This I, right here, I am an appended collection of ever-changing experiences. This viewpoint retroactively confirms the way that I have evolved over the years, and his theory of becoming encourages me proactively to take risks outside of my comfort zone. Evil is an inevitable byproduct of many finite creatures with their own freedoms. Because of this, and because nothing is foreordained, we can't shirk our responsibility to take care of each other and the planet. God influences us, yes, but God is not the big babysitter in the sky. I am an adult, thank you very much, and I like to make my own decisions. Let's see, we left Hartshorne back when he blew a fuse. Remember that? Well, when he was 12, Charles and his family moved east to Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. It was rolling countryside with covered bridges. Yeah, just think Rockwell, right? Charles boarded at the Yates School, a secondary school in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. He was often a loner, but he made friends through sports as a football and tennis player. In his later years, he wrote, "Since having a good TV set so that I can see the balls in their flight, I have watched some of the great recent matches. It is my most frivolous hobby." This echoes his distaste for TV, and in fact, in his old age, he lobbied against adopting high-definition TV. He was quirky in other ways and knew he was absent-minded and eccentric. He never drove a car, preferring instead the bicycle. He never smoked, seldom drank alcohol, never coffee. When Charles got appendicitis at Yates, he found that he really wanted to write poetry, and he composed his first poem at the age of 17 called The Evening Hymn of the Hermit Thrush. I thought of Dave Hudson when I came across this. Here is a stanza from this really long rhyming poem. Birds may not have souls, but it seems to me divine the real source of their music must be. Would that mine were the fountain from which it springs, then my verses were sweet as the song he sings. Charles Hartshorne had a lifelong interest in ornithology, and he wrote the book Born to Sing. He and his wife Dorothy later traveled the world to watch and record bird songs. I mean, they went to Japan, they went to Peru, they went to everywhere in Europe, they went to they went all over the world. But let's you and me travel back to Hartshorne as a teenager. He first thought of becoming, as a professional, a forest ranger. And then he thought of becoming an English literature teacher. Instead, he just kept writing poems whenever he could. In 1915, he went to Haverford College in Pennsylvania. While there, Charles attended Quaker meeting. Here he realized that God is by essence ubiquitous and cannot be absent from anything, including any experience, if he or she is present anywhere. Yes, that was Charles Hartshorne using she to refer to God back in 1915. When America entered World War I, Charles responded to a military recruiter and became an orderly at an English army hospital near Le Tréport in France. He was 20 years old. In one respect, at least, the army corrupted me, he wrote. Since then, when suddenly angered, usually by things, not people, I am likely to find myself swearing. And what kind of swear words did he use? The British said it best. Strike me pink. Strike me pink. I enjoyed it greatly. It was on the cliffs above the hospital that Hartshorne experienced his insight about the relation of mind to matter. The physical world is directly given entirely in emotional terms. The world is first felt and only afterward thought. To Hartshorne, the word felt is close to a term used by Whitehead first. The term was prehend, prehend, like in apprehended, except just prehend, which is a kind of direct, non-sensory, primal perception. Prehensions are feelings of things and are everywhere. Prehensions are the glue of the universe, the elemental units of experience. Prehensions grow and change exponentially as more events are included. God prehends the world and its creatures in the same way that a human includes all of its individual cells. Well, those cliffs were also where Hartshorne, in the middle of the war, looked down on those children in the playground that Dave talked about. There is where he realized, and I'm going to repeat it because it's worth listening to. This is what he realized. He said, "There is some minimal good, beauty in all life, including my own, and that what finally matters is the life of the whole, the something that includes me, outlasts me, and contains more good than I can distinctly imagine." Well, speaking of goodness, once Charles had a dream in which he was at a conference and had just eaten some really, really good cheesecake. But in the dream, he could not write any thoughts about it on the blackboard as he had been requested. He couldn't come up with any philosophy of goodness in cheesecake. So waking up from this bad dream, Hartshorne wrote on a paper near his bed, "In all thinking or perceiving, we are aware of reality as more or less good. And what is a reality that one is aware of as good? The proper word for this is beautiful." Well, later in France, the good and the beautiful appeared again on his table. Oh, the first taste of a good French champagne seemed unspeakably beautiful. A very few glasses one evening put me into a perfect glow of euphoria, so that for an hour after getting into bed, I had all happy and beautiful thoughts. This is what philosophers do when no one's looking. After France, Hartshorne spent 4 years at Harvard getting degrees and studying in Freiburg, Germany, under two of the greatest modern thinkers, Edmund Husserl and Martin Heidegger. Back at Harvard, he took classes with Alfred North Whitehead. Whitehead was a British mathematician. He wrote Principia Mathematica with Bertrand Russell. Yes, and he developed influential philosophies of math and science. He challenged the assumptions of materialistic Newtonian physics. He came up with the fundamental idea of process philosophy, where space and time are inseparable, and the basic metaphysical building block of life is the event, the actual occasion. He took into account new discoveries in Einstein's relativity and quantum mechanics. While at Harvard, Hartshorne got Whitehead to be his mentor, graded papers for him, and taught classes. Charles also began editing the papers of Charles Sanders Peirce, the founder of pragmatism. Hartshorne went to teach at the University of Chicago in 1928. The first thing that happened to him while he was there was, well, he met his wife, Dorothy Cooper. I mean, he had written to her before when he was at Harvard, but there she was in Chicago living in an apartment. So only a few days were needed to settle the matter. Rarely can two people have been so serenely confident that they wanted each other. Dorothy was 24, Charles 31, and they married at St. Paul's Universalist Church in Chicago. They later had one child, Emily. Dorothy was as colorful a figure as her husband. Raised a Universalist, she was a school teacher, classically trained singer, and bibliographer. She edited most of Charles's manuscripts. Charles wrote this about his wife: "I have never known a human being more knowledgeable than Dorothy. Mention almost any subject, and she thinks of something relevant and usually quite accurate to say." One of Charles's favorite pastimes was to listen to Dorothy sing Mozart to him in their living room. Aww. Charles and Dorothy had a long and enduring love, and he wrote about love, not just the romantic kind. Hartshorne, as a dipolar theist, thought God's love in the abstract is love for all creation, for all time. But God's concrete loving changes all the time because new creatures with new experiences keep popping up, or rather popping out. For many years, Hartshorne held a joint appointment as professor at Meadville Lombard Theological School, a UU seminary in Chicago. After 27 years in that city, the Hartshornes moved to Atlanta, where Charles taught at Emory. While there, Dorothy sang in a choral group, and she organized an arts council. Charles's next teaching post was at the University of Texas at Austin. At Dorothy's urging, they both became members of the UU church there. But in the Dictionary of UU Biography online, it reports that, well, Hartshorne did not always identify with a Unitarian congregation. Hartshorne thought that Unitarians, in their focus on the anti-Trinitarianism of Socinus, had failed to notice the 16th century thinker's most interesting theological discovery, that God is both temporal and eternal in different respects. In 1978, Hartshorne retired, which was just after the time that I began receiving shipments of his books in Claremont. Here are some lines from a poem I wrote about that some years later. Did she mean to send treasures? A yellowing, lacy handkerchief in Philosophers Speak of God. A bluebell pressed on page 100 of A Natural Theology for Our Time. Baby hair inside the Divine Relativity. Love letters they wrote. His scratches like his birdsong scores. Her handwriting loopy and full. Charles and Dorothy kept sending gifts of books infused with love. I still carry what he said. Everything a person feels, thinks, does, each beauty, each parting, false start and feet, lives in divine memory. Nothing is lost. Dorothy died in 1995. They had been married 67 years. Charles lived on in Austin and passed away in 2000 at the age of 103. See what happens when you don't ride in a car, you use a bike? Yeah. Charles Hartshorne has allowed me ever since to believe in a God others might not call God, the one who changes constantly yet endures forever, the supreme being who loves all, the one we create together each moment of our lives. Or as Hartshorne put it, to live is to care about, enjoy, and contribute to the great ocean of feelings that is reality. That sea, considered in its unity, or as embraced in one mind, is divine. This is my religion of contributionism. We contribute our feelings to others, and above all, to the universal recipient of feeling, the one to whom all hearts are open.